Thanks for joining us for this podcast. I think it's an important thing that we're discussing, and I think we're going into a century now where crime is evolving. So that means that the way that we deal with crime needs to evolve simultaneously. So, just kind of, could you just give like a quick background to yourself and where you're from, etc., and what work you've been doing recently?
I'm Alex. I'm 21. I'm from Coventry. I'm currently going into my third year of my politics degree at the University of Leicester, and I've been a member of the West Midlands Crime Authority for the past year. It's been an absolute privilege working with policymakers across the region, and within that we've also worked closely with law enforcement, policing, things like that. Part of the Young Combined Authorities manifesto is looking at tackling youth crime within the region, and I think we've made some very important steps in the work we've done.
Cheers, mate. And obviously we've just been joined by Gina. So Gina, if you just want to give a quick intro to yourself, the work you've been doing recently, what you've been involved with, that sort of stuff.
Okay, so hi, I'm Gina. I've been a member of the YCA for the past year. At the moment, I've started a job with the NHS, doing a PA support role.
Cool, that's great. I've also been a member of the YCA for the past year. I've been working on different things such as mental health and that, and Gina will know me and Gina have worked on different mental health projects. We did a podcast for that. And recently I've just started my work with the Police and Crime Commissioner's office, and coming to an end of term for my Youth Commissioner work. So yeah, cheers for that, both of you. So just moving forward as kind of a first point of discussion, obviously I said to Alex, Gina, just before you arrived, in the sense that the reason why we're doing the podcast today is because we want to, crime is evolving, so because of that, the way we look at crime and deal with it and deal with the different aspects of crime needs to evolve as well. So with that in mind, and I'll start with you, Alex. With that in mind, do you think, because I've always thought podcasting is a great way to kind of provide some solid data and opinions around a particular topic. Alex, what are your kind of initial thoughts on that, around the value of podcasting in relation to discussing with the community around crime and what they've kind of engaged with?
Yeah, I largely agree with the concept. It's a nice and accessible way of obtaining information, because not only are the tangible aspects being discussed, but there's also, it saves somebody the trouble of having to go and do the research all on their own. Everything's being laid out, the issues are being addressed and distributed with loads of ease on social media.
In terms of, like you're saying, from a researcher's perspective or policymakers' perspectives, it's really important to get that tangible information, that qualitative data that you would kind of struggle to get elsewhere. And I think also another point is that podcasting is really easy to access, whereas we could either have a studio in usual times, or I think dealing with COVID is kind of allowed for this new style of podcasting where we're just doing it over Zoom calls or Skype calls or something like that, so it makes it a lot easier and more accessible. Gina, what are your kind of initial thoughts on it? Do you think there's any value to it in engaging with the community?
Yes, I do. I think it is a good way to hear other people's opinions on matters. Like, obviously previously we've done a mental health podcast, and obviously today we're doing one about crime. So I really think it's a valid opportunity for people to hear, because obviously sometimes people might read stuff in the newspaper or read something on the internet, but sometimes they want to hear it rather than read it. So it does give that different opinion on things.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think another point is my kind of conception around, because I'm a big advocate for it, and I thought I'd get you two on to kind of present either supporting opinions or even challenging opinions to it, because obviously nothing good comes out of anything without it being challenged and developed in a critical way. But I think that podcasting, I think, is really good to facilitate debate between two parties. And in future, if the PCC's office does kind of look at it as a good option to facilitate debate between professionals, potentially retired police officers, former gang members, then I think it can have some really positive impacts. But what do you think, Alex, around that kind of that? Is it good for facilitation, for kind of adversarial kind of discussion, or do you reckon it's better for kind of like what we're having now, more of around the table, kind of easy, casual discussion?
I suppose the benefit of it is it can easily work both ways. I think depending on what the ultimate aim of the discussion is, it can be tailored to be more of a adversarial kind of structure, or an open discussion like we're having right now. And I think that's the beauty of it, because it's made relatively casually. And it's very easy to actually create logistically. I think it can easily facilitate both. I think you're probably going to have I'd say a podcast will probably be a little more productive when it's an open discussion like this, but it's not to completely say that the more sort of adversarial ones don't carry their own merit, I suppose.
Yeah, I mean, Gina, if you were professional, for example, on a particular subject, let's say you were a retired police officer, for example, do you feel that being, obviously, let's say with your character, do you feel that you would rather prefer to kind of sit in an argumentative and a structured debate kind of setting, or something more like a round table discussion, very light, very kind of casual, like I mentioned? Which one would you prefer, do you reckon?
I think probably more the casual type for me. I don't like formal settings, formal environments, so this feels a bit more relaxed for me. Obviously, I know both of you two prior to this anyway, so I feel a bit more relaxed now.
And obviously, I think that's the thing, isn't it? I think how true can podcasting be in getting honest and clear views out of someone? Because a lot of people, like, I've done this before when I've been on, like, for example, I mean, I've been on BBC WM, so slightly different on radio. If we look at on radio, for example, you think, well, I've got to completely censor myself as to what I really think. But I feel that we need to I think that podcasting is a way that we can kind of break down those barriers and really get some valuable, honest kind of opinions out. Because I feel that, in my opinion, there's no point being kind of polite and courteous when it comes of no positive result, if you understand what I'm trying to say. So, like, my question to you, Alex, is, what do you think that podcasting is a way in which we can, let's say, bring out more honesty in people if we can create a less formal setting?
I'd say in two ways, really. The first being, well, like you say, it's relatively, it's freely made by individuals, so that you don't have to concern yourself overly with censorship and whatnot. You can be quite free with what you're saying. But I think also, rather than having in-person group discussions, I suppose from a psychological point of view, being behind a screen whilst you do it, I suppose you don't feel as pressured as, say, if you were in a real live scenario, things like that. So I think in that sense that would probably help facilitate people who perhaps wouldn't be as forthcoming in a real setting, or perhaps honest.
And Gina, I think, moving on from what Alex was just saying, I think that, what would you feel, because at the end of the day, the whole point of a kind of a crime-centred podcast is going to benefit, like I said, policymakers. It's going to benefit, in a way, neighbourhood policing units, because they could gauge a greater sense of kind of the community feel and the mood, and they could address their kind of policing. Because some neighbourhoods don't want kind of a friendly police officer. They like to see a strong police presence that's kind of professional and does the job properly. Not to say that a friendly police presence wouldn't do that. I'm just saying Some neighbourhoods prefer a less nonsense kind of style. That's what they would describe it as. Not the words I would use, but that's what they would describe it as. So my question to you, Gina, is: do you think that this kind of podcasting would provide that valuable information? And my question also would be, if you were, because we want to build bridges between everyone that's been involved within like the criminal system, and that goes from victims to perpetrators to the punishers and the prosecutors. Do you think that as a victim of a particular crime, at some point in your life, you would be happy to come on and talk about it and the way it's experienced you, and criticise the way that you've experienced it, and criticise or perhaps praise the support that you've received? Let's say you've previously had a lot of experience with drug abuse in your life, and you've moved past it now, but during that time you were always in contact with different supportive organisations. Do you feel that you would be able to come onto a podcast and talk about your experience?
So I think I would, because if it helps others, then it helps get the word out, I guess.
And do you think that it would be valuable as well in terms of in terms of gauging valuable information for those organisations that did support you? Can they kind of take that, what you're saying, and work with it, or do you reckon it would be too casual to work with? So could a policymaker, could someone who was actually in a professional setting listen to this and think, right, yeah, obviously, let's say you were talking about your experience, could they take from that and say, okay, this is what's wrong with their service, this is what's right with their service, this is what we can do going forward?
I'd say yes, because I've used services in the past for other matters. If there was anything wrong with it, I'd find it difficult to tell it to their face. Whereas if it was done through here, and then it's a bit more not direct, but then people are hearing it.
Well, it's a difficult question. I'm sure Alex would agree with me that this is why we're here. This is why we're here discussing it now, because it's something that's probably, I don't think it's ever been trialed professionally before. When was the last time you heard of a professional podcast where it was used and the discussion that it was used for something meaningful in shaping services? Because they've probably done it in America, because they've done everything in America, haven't they? You know what I mean? But in this country, I think it could be really valuable. If there's one thing people in this country are good at, it's talking. You know what I mean? We complain for days. But I think it's about taking that discussion in the kind of the crime world and focusing it into something valuable. But Alex, what kind of, off the top of your head, do you reckon there'll be any kind of challenges to this kind of approach? Do you feel that there's going to be anything where you thought, when I told you, you know what, Alex, we're going to start a podcast, we're going to discuss all these things about crime, we're going to build bridges. Did anything think to you, you know what, there's a part of that probably wouldn't work?
Off the top of my head, no. If this had been a project that was, say, suggested 8 years ago, for example, there might have been more logistical concerns, people's ready access to computers and whatnot, and the ability to be able to make these. But as far as logistics go, I feel that wouldn't be a challenge these days. I feel the nature of podcasting is, and the fact that it does allow for that freer communication. I suppose if people don't want to be seen on camera, they can just blot them out. So there's a degree of anonymity as well. As far as challenges that I think that are presented, I don't think there are that many, or none that I can think of at least.
Yeah. I think like you say, logistically, that's a good point. Actually, I didn't actually think of that, because I feel that we're in a tech, the age of tech now. This really does facilitate for what kind of what podcasting can provide. It facilitates for that. It it elevates the benefits of what's possible. And actually, on that, I really like that point of anonymity, because I didn't think of that before, because I was always thinking, well, you want professionals on there, but I actually think, Gina, we were talking about the victims, weren't we, about the victims of crime, and I actually think that their anonymity would actually be amazing in sharing their experience. So to rephrase the question to you, Gina, probably just a yes or no. You, as, let's say you had experienced major drug abuse in your earlier life, and it later on you wanted to come and share that experience on a podcast. do you feel the anonymity of it would allow you to be that extra level of honest that we were discussing?
Yes.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I definitely know that, because I know if you can't put a face to the name, or can't put a name to a face, or neither to either, you know what I mean? It really can have that extra level of value, I think. But I think moving on, so kind of, but still in kind of relation to that point of anonymity, I feel that one potential downside that I've thought of is that what the problem with podcasting is, it needs to be very specific and structured, and it needs to be well designed. There's definitely a strong chance of let's say if we went into the podcast and it was just we're just going off the top of our heads, there's a strong chance you'll get some data out of it. But wouldn't you agree, Alex, that the data that you would get from a really structured one, and the questions were really thought out, or perhaps the environment was crafted so well for the professionals and the individuals involved that their simple discussion would provide such strong results? What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, certainly. I think the more structured it is, the more professional it would seem, the more productive the podcast would be and usable, I suppose. I don't think that necessarily precludes, the possibility of, perhaps supplementing that with slightly less formalized ones, which can, maybe be edited in, for reference and whatnot. I suppose you could take segments of it, not use them as standalone, and incorporate that into the more structured ones, because then that can be then discussed within the formalized setting.
That's exactly right. I mean, Gina, what are your thoughts on that? Do you think that's good? So let's say, I don't know, how we was on about victims and things. Let's say they just wanted to give a soundbite, and then what we would do is we'll take that soundbite and we would put it in a professional podcast, and then two professionals in that particular field would discuss it. What's your opinions on that, as opposed to getting the victims in the podcast?
Well, if the victims didn't feel comfortable coming on, then that's an option there. I always feel best that it's best to give people options to what they prefer. If they don't want to speak, then they shouldn't have to. It's just up to them, really.
And I think that's the key thing about podcasting in this setting and in this field, is that there needs to be a willingness there. It can't be forced. You can't pressure someone into it either. If you ask someone, do you want to get involved? It's similar to how if I ask one of you, and if you just said to me no, then I'm not going to say, well, why not? I'm not going to get enraged about it, because if I was pressuring you, because some people can be pressured like that, and if they came on, the likelihood is the contributions that they're going to give are going to be pretty poor, and they don't want to be there, So I feel that's definitely another very important point. But I think, do you reckon that there needs to be, is there a need for podcasting in the criminal world? Is there a need, and in the law enforcement world, is there a need to build more bridges, or do you reckon there's already lines of kind of discussion and communication in place now that facilitate for that good information? Do you reckon, or do you think that, is there any need? Is what I'm asking. We'll start with you, Alex.
I think on my end, I'd say it certainly wouldn't go amiss, because from experience on my end, the only time I've ever really seen, formalised discussions or discussions in general on police conduct or the way policing should be, and this is just from what I've observed, tends to have come about after, I suppose scandal is a bit of a harsh word to use, but when there's been some kind of incident that's, the significant amount of public attention, that there have been structured interviews, say on radio or on TV, attempts to try and reconciliation in whatever kind of grievances has emerged. But I think something like this that can be made on an ad hoc basis, that's logistically easy to create, and it's very nature, podcasts in general are just designed to maintain that level of professionalism and discuss issues for the sake of discussing issues, without there necessarily being a reason to need to. I think it's a really accessible and frequent way that these kind of discussions can be had. I think it could lead to real progress.
Yeah, absolutely. And Gina, do you reckon there's a need to build more bridges, or do you think there's plenty? So, I mean, we were all members of the Young Combined Authority, weren't we? So, do you think that similar to how there needs to be more representation of young people in decision making in the region, do you feel that there needs to be more dialogue with how we deal with crime, or do you reckon there's enough dialogue already?
I think there needs to be more involvement from all parties, really. Crime is such a big topic, a big area, and loads of things happen, and I just feel like sometimes victims don't always get heard, for example. So it's really important to hear voices from all ends, if that makes sense.
Yeah. And I feel that what's your opinion of hearing out? I mean, you mentioned about hearing about people from all ends of the process. Do you reckon there's any value, and this is to both of you now, do you reckon there's any value in kind of getting the actual people who commit the crimes to speak about why they do it and the reasoning behind it? Do you reckon that's any valuable information?
I certainly think so, because there are many out there who just assume that people are innately good or bad, and people that have turned to crime have the latter. And I suppose, and if these individuals are prepared to discuss their experiences, their circumstances, and what led them to engage in criminal activity, can really allow for the sort of societal reconciliation. And I know these have sort of been tried on a smaller scale, where there've been documentaries and things on TV, but these are really been as and when. But something like this be made relatively frequently. It could be posted on numerous social media outlets, easily accessible. So I do think there's a lot of value to that.
Definitely. And Gina, do you reckon there's any value in getting those who commit crime to discuss the reasons behind it?
Yeah, I think I do, because crime affects everyone in a sense, and especially those that are involved in it from the victim side. I believe they deserve a right to know why that person committed XYZ, because without it, it won't give them that peace. Does that make sense?
Absolutely. And I feel that, especially towards individuals, like you've said, that's a really good point, because as an individual, you want to understand, particularly with murder and crimes like that, and on that level, you really want to understand why they did what they did. But on a professional point of view, it's looking at how we can, because I mean, let's say how we can deal with it. Because let's say we have someone come on the podcast and they're a young individual, and let's say they don't want to disclose it, but let's say that they'll say that they've recently been involved, or in the past they've been involved with dealing and selling and dealing drugs. And then they give that information, and they say, well, I've had such and such, my life was awful, but my area was in complete poverty, but also there was a cultural pressure. It sends so many signals to different people, sends signals to government in terms of, well, this is a deprived area, what can we do to stop that? Can we encourage business? That's an avenue, and generate, give people jobs. Is that an avenue we can go down in that area? But also, it's like it can be a cultural thing, because I think living in the consumerist society that we live in, I feel that everyone strives to be the best and have more than everyone else. No one will admit it, or some people will admit it, but not everyone will admit it. But it's always up there, because we're geared to kind of have the best jobs, have the most money, have the biggest houses. That's the goal, and that's everyone's goal for most people. So, and that can fuel a lot of crime, and I think if we got people on the podcast, that would definitely reflect that. Just to kind of as a final point, would you carry this podcast? Would you actually go through with it if it was in your hands? And secondly, do you feel that what format would you do it in? if you know. If you don't know, fair enough. But just I'll give that to both of you. What I mean, first of all, would you do it, and what format would you do it in?
Would I do it? Yes. It can be accomplished very simply. It can be produced with ease, and it can be, they can be churned out, like en masse, essentially. As far as how I would structure it, at the moment, I'd probably have to give that some thought. But I think, for starters, I mean, the kind of discussion we're having right now, with somebody who, say, has, a set of questions predominantly, and that sort of leads to the discussion, I think, foundationally, that's not a bad way of addressing it, because it keeps the conversation in a flow, and it doesn't allow people to go off on tangent too much. It keeps the conversation relevant, and for a limited time frame that a podcast has, I think that's certainly important.
Thank you, Alex. And Gina, have you got any final thoughts?
I think I would, but again, in terms of structure, it's one of those things where I would have to have a long think about it, because it's just such a hard thing to think about at the moment on top of the head.
It's something that, like, even I'm considering, like, even if you ask me what kind of format would you do it in, there's so many different thoughts rushing through my head, like whether I'd use debate or discussion format, who would I have on there, would I have the anonymity aspect of it, or would that just be an option? But the fact that, I'd like to thank you now actually for coming on today, because we've managed to generate such valuable points that I feel that, and obviously I will actually make sure that the right people hear what we have to say, and we'll make sure that our voices are heard, and also I think moving on, if this becomes a serious kind of thing in terms of podcasting in the criminal justice world, then I think we've done so many lives a great favour. Now, thank you both for coming on and spending your time to have a discussion, really, on a Wednesday evening. So thank you both, and I wish you the best.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
I'll catch you later.